Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters. How are you guys doing? And I hope you're well. So it's your brother Imran ibn Mansour, and the rest of you guys, how are you doing? I hope you're well as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through a refutation of Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. But not only am I going to refute it, I'm going to show you how Richard Dawkins actually helps us to prove the existence of God. Yes. So let's get down to it. Point number one, science is the way, the light, and the truth. Richard Dawkins says, very early on in the book, in fact, I believe in the chapter, The God Hypothesis, he says, if there is anything that lies beyond the natural, then which is imperfectly understood, then we hope to be able to understand it and embrace it within the natural. So here what he is saying is that if there is such a thing as God, by the way, I'm not going to use the word God, I'm going to use the word divine creator, because our divine is Allah, not a blonde-haired, blue-eyed man that walks on water, nor is it a statue of an elephant or a monkey. I don't mean that as a disrespect to any other faith, but their views and their creed of God is very different to ours. So let's put Allah in a totally separate category. So divine creator, right? Divine creator, that's what we're going to talk about. So he's saying that if there is a divine creator that lies beyond the natural, then science will be able to explain it. This is a naturalistic approach. Richard Dawkins, he takes the scientism approach. Science is the means to absolute truth. But science is limited by time, space. Science is limited by the present. Science is limited that which it can subject to a test. It can only subject to a test that which it can observe. It cannot observe what is outside the universe. So how can science ever tell us if there is a divine outside the universe? Clearly, science has some limitations.
Basically, you're saying that everything can be explained by science, correct?
Well, everything about the natural world can be explained by science.
Science cannot account for mathematical and logical truths. Science, in fact, presupposes mathematical and logical truths. So for science to try and explain it would be tantamount to science going around in circles. Science cannot account for metaphysical truths, the self, the conscious, if this external world is in fact a reality. It is rationally we can, but no, scientifically we cannot show that. Science, nor does it tell us anything about moral truths. It can't account for whether the Nazis in the concentration camps were evil, which in fact objectively, with objective morality, we can say yes, they were evil. But science doesn't comment on whether it was evil, whether it was not evil. The same way science cannot account for aesthetic truths. For example, if you see a wife and she looks beautiful, and as we say in the UK, you say she looks real nice, dressed nice, you make up everything. You're like, babe, you look banging today. MashaAllah, subhanallah, right? That's an aesthetic truth. And science cannot comment on your perception of beauty, right? And finally, most surprisingly, science cannot account for science itself. Because for you to say that science is the means to absolute truth, how do you scientifically show that to be true? You can't scientifically show that statement to be true. It's self-refuting. And science actually, many scientific theories, for example, Einstein's theory of special relativity, sorry, it hinges on the assumption that when light travels from point A to point B, it travels at a constant speed. But you can't prove that. You have to assume that. So science is based on faith to some degree, right? Science cannot tell us about personal things that require personal explanations. For example, the purpose as to why things are made. For example, you can explain the nutritional value and the way the constituent particles are in a cake, but you can't explain why that cake is made. The cake is made because I'm hungry. I want to eat the cake. So as we can conclude, as Keith Ward says very nicely, that the question of God is indeed a question of fact, but is not a question it is not a question that can be answered through scientific explanation. Ultimately, it's truth in metaphysical options, and you can marshal cases for and against it, but ultimately you cannot get a conclusion through science. You need an alternative explanation which will provide. So science is most definitely not the way, the light, and the truth. And the God hypothesis, the hypothesis of the divine creator, is not something that science should comment on. Richard Dawkins, you failed. Okay, so the second point that Richard Dawkins makes that will help us understand this topic in Islam in a much more better light. He says that religion and science are in conflict. Now he's generalizing and putting Islam in the same category as every other religion. And that is a category mistake, because whereas people like Galileo were oppressed by the church, and clearly science and religion, science and Christianity were in conflict there, and he was put under house arrest for his advancements in science. 600 years before that, an Islamic scholar named Ibn al-Haytham, may Allah have mercy on him, actually came up with the first scientific, with the scientific method. right? He came up with the scientific method, which was then developed by later Islamic scholars and then ultimately refined by Western European scientists during the Enlightenment period or the Renaissance period. Now, I just want to highlight here, it's very wrong to attribute the scientific method to Aristotle. To the Greeks specifically, because whereas the Greeks were the first Western civilization to start learning about the world through observation and measurement, in no way did they have enough knowledge and enough structure, to actually call it a method, a scientific method. Aristotle was indeed the father of the empirical sciences, but the father of the scientific method was Ibn al-Haytham, right? And this is something which has been a major kind of it's been a major mistake to attribute this to Galileo. And secondly, Roger Bacon, not Francis Bacon, Roger Bacon, who was around in the 13th century, it is attributed to him the inductive method, that he introduced the inductive method into science. And this is very wrong because Ibn al-Haytham, again, 200 years before him, had actually criticized for Aristotle for not actually contributing to the inductive method. And he saw the inductive method as significant in terms of true scientific research. So again, Richard Dawkins, you have failed. In no way is Islam in conflict with science. In fact, Islam championed science, and actually Islam facilitated science to grow. As the scholar Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah rahimahullah said, that Allah has given us, our Creator has given us two books. One is the Quran, that is the literal book, and the second book is this dunya, is the world, right? And we interpret the Quran in light of the world and vice versa. We look at two books at the same time. And the way that we study the Quran is through the scholars, and the way that we study the world is through the natural sciences. So Islam is not in conflict. Thank you very much, Richard Dawkins. You were wrong! Okay, now the third point that Richard the Dork makes, or the third thing that I want to comment on, he says that religion is the root of all evil. And look at what he says about God. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Now, in no way do I support the Old Testament view of God, the Judeo-Christian view, but I'm sure no Christian or Jew sees their God in that way. And secondly, it is very wrong of you to call this chapter the God hypothesis and then only speak in light of what you perceive to be the God of the Christians and the Jews. This is very wrong. I'm going to actually argue on the flip side, inshallah, and show you how actually anti-religion, and specifically as a result of atheism and secularism, much more violence has been actually achieved, right? Much more violence has actually come as a result of these things, as a result of these worldviews, than religion in any way, shape or form. Now, in the Devil's Delusion, David Belinsky, he actually, in his second chapter, he highlights, and he's got a list of every single massacre that occurred in the previous century as a result of anti-religious movements, specifically secular and even atheist movements. And, you know, he covers everything. And I've actually calculated the statistics for you, and here it is a visual for you to see. 200,418,000 people got massacred in the previous century as a result of anti-religious movements. Stalin, for an example, who was responsible for about 20 million, I believe, of his own people being murdered. He was a Marxist. The Marxist view is that religion is the opium of the masses and you should eradicate religion. And in his crusade to destroy churches and all these people, subhanAllah, I mean, all these massacres that have occurred in the previous century, as Walter Wink says, more people have been murdered and massacred in the last century as a result of anti-religion than in the previous 10 to 15 centuries of religious war. Wow. 1 century is responsible for more than a millennium's worth of massacres. And that was anti-religion. Many of those things were directly as a result of atheism. So we can say, yeah, there definitely is a root of all evil. But it would appear anti-religion is the root of all evil. Not Islam, not religion, not Islam specifically. Richard Dawkins, again, I'm sorry, but you failed, bro. Okay, that's the argument I want to present forth, right, against Richard Dawkins is that there has actually been a lot of good that has come from Islam. And in essence, you could actually argue that Islam is the root of all good as opposed to evil. I can't comment on all the good that Islam has done, but let me just give you a bit of a rough idea, specifically in the context of Richard Dawkins. So a lady called Fatima al-Fikri, I believe it was in the 10th or the 11th century, came up with the first university. Hold up. University was invented by Muslims? Yes, universities were invented by Muslims as a direct result of Islam, because Islam advocates people to go out there and learn. And this is something that has been referenced in the National Geographic book 1001 Muslim Inventions, right? And you can check that out for yourself. But then we can take it a step further. I've already established that the scientific method itself came from Islam. So universities came from Islam. The scientific method as we know it today was birthed from Islam. What else? In Toledo in Spain, two guys, Adelaide of Bath and Daniel of Morley, they happened to go down there and they found some Arabic manuscripts that came as a direct result of Islamic scholarship. And they took them back to the UK and they set up an institution called Oxford University. So Richard Dawkins, you work as a professor in a university, as a scientist, specifically in Oxford University. If anyone has to be thankful to Islam and Allah specifically, it's you. Why are you being so selfish? Sorry, I mean, why are you being so ungrateful? That's a better word, a better term, right? You have got much to be thankful to Islam for, right? So the presumption of innocence, that also came from Islam. If you look at King Louis in France, he introduced the presumption of innocence, which is the fundamental axiom of law, right? In the Western world, like you can walk into any court. You can walk into any courtroom and say, you know what, I'm not guilty, you need to prove me wrong. And this came as a result of King Louis, who actually found a monk that taught him this, who had learnt it from the Muslims. Again, this is all in the history books. You can check it out, right? And many things. Professor Thomas Arnold and Adam Smith, who's that funny looking guy in the back of your £20 note, both of these individuals, they state in their works that it was the Islamic advancements, right, from Andalusian Spain and Islam in general that facilitated the Renaissance. For if Islam did not, in the Khilafah, the Islamic government, the Islamic Sultanate as it were, wasn't the way it is and did not actually facilitate and cultivate individuals to look into the natural sciences and the world in the way that they did, then this would have not, if it wasn't for that, we would not have been able to actually have the Renaissance and the Enlightened period that we did. So please thank Islam. If you have iPhones, you have iPads, you have BBs, computers, all these things, all these scientific advancements that came as a direct result of what Islam facilitated for you. So Richard Dawkins, please do not say that religion, especially Islam, is the root of all evil. In fact, Islam can pretty much be seen as the root of all good. You failed. Okay, so the fifth point that I want to make, and this is very surprising. Richard Dawkins says that religion is the root of all evil. You remember that, right? It was actually his, I believe, Channel 4, BBC documentary. It was a very famous one. It came up like before the God Delusion. He says religion is the root of all evil. This is a clear-cut contradiction, not only with what he says, but his atheist belief, because he quotes Victor J. Stenger in his book, River Out of Eden. He says that the universe, right, has no design, no purpose, no good, no evil, just pitiless indifference. No design, no purpose, no good, no evil. The religion has the universe has no evil. So how on earth are you actually coming forth and saying that religion is the root of all evil? As an atheist, there's no such thing as objective morality to you. There actually is. We can prove objective morals. This is one of the areas where atheism, it can't provide an explanation, because we do have objective morality, but objective morality only exists if there is an ultimate moral being that actually set forth these moral bounds. But atheism can't account for this. So for them, they have to take a subjective approach to morality. And this is in total contradiction with what you're saying, Richard Dawkins. There is evil, you admit it. Where did that evil come from? You can't explain it, so you just end up contradicting yourself. This is why I call you a dork. You failed again. Let's move on. What's going on, my brothers and sisters? How you doing? So listen, look, the sixth point that I want to make is that Richard Dawkins is wearing the wrong shades. He's wearing the wrong pair of glasses, because your worldview is actually dependent upon the glasses that you look through. If you wear blue glasses, you will see blue. But I'm wearing red glasses, so I'll see red. In actuality, I'm wearing Prada, so I see everything with a whole bunch of swagger right about now. But see, Richard Dawkins doesn't see the same swagger as me. Why? Because the glasses that he's looking through are messed up. So let's go to the heart of the issue. As Ibn Taymiyyah, may Allah have mercy on him, one of the greatest Islamic scholars and rationalists, said, when you're dealing with someone's problem, go to the heart of their issue and work out what is the core of their unbelief. And that's what I want to do, right? Because before I unravel his arguments against God's existence, or Allah's existence, first, let's see if we can engage in a paradigm shift. Now see, the glasses that Richard Dawkins sees reality through. What is reality for him? For him, reality is materialism. He has a materialist approach to the world. What is materialist approach? It is basically that the universe and everything is nothing but a whole bunch of matter. It's just particles. Now, if you have a materialist approach, from the get-go, you have eliminated there ever being a possibility of a divine being, because you have eliminated any possibility of consciousness outside of this matter. So from the get-go, you will never accept a divine creator to ever exist. So what we need to do is see, look, is materialism actually a sufficient way to look at reality? Is that a sufficient way for us to understand reality? If yes, then cool. But if no, then we need to find out what a better way to look at reality is and then interpret those arguments in light of that reality. So let's check it out. I've got 2 reasons why materialist approach to reality is a whole bunch of crap, excuse my French. So the first one is, we don't actually really know what matter is. I mean, originally matter was a few simple particles, but now we have like a whole zoo of flickering particles, the majority of which we don't actually know what they are. Like, we don't actually like these insubstantial wave particles, most of them we probably sorry, not that we don't know what they are, most of them are probably undetectable to us, right? And then you have the likes of John Gibson and Paul Davies, who write in their book The Matter Myth: matter is a sort of illusion or appearance produced by some mysterious and unknown substratum in interaction with the human mind. So we don't actually know what matter is. So therefore, how can that be an adequate way for explaining the reality of the world? Because in essence, if you reduce everything to matter, what you're saying is we don't actually know what reality is, but we do know. The second point is that if you take the materialist approach, you have to reduce everything down to its basics. And although this is very beneficial in terms of some things, like with regards to science, when you have an ontological and an epistemological approach, when you engage in, epistemological and ontological reductionism, then you have a serious problem. Because you don't actually get the whole gist of what the reality is of many things. For example, this video that you're watching right now. Okay, the sound that is coming out of my mouth, if you reduce it in terms of its material properties, it's just sound waves and sound particles and sound vibrations. Now, okay, you understand that, and you reduced it to its material properties. But does that actually say anything with regards to the significance of these sounds? No. Chemistry and physics can't tell us anything about the significance of the sounds that are coming out of my mouth or the speech. You need a concept, a higher level explanation of concepts of language and speech to be able to understand what it is that I am saying, and to be able to interpret what you're seeing in terms of my body language. But you can't explain that in terms of materialism. So the reductionist, to reduce everything to a materialist approach is an inadequate way. Not only is it a way that doesn't fully explain to us what it is, because we don't actually know what matter is, but it is a way that actually leaves many things unexplained. So again, Richard, man, you keep failing, bro. You need to change your glasses. So we're about to pull the Gucci out, because the Prada's not working right about now. Materialism, it fails. I'm sorry. Okay, so we got the Gucci on and the Prada's off. So hopefully Richard Dawkins has joined us and he's changed his glasses, and we've seen that the materialism approach to reality is wrong. Moving on to the 7th point that I want to make, and this is actually this is the nail in the coffin to with regards to materialism as a whole, and this is consciousness. Okay, so we as human beings, we experience things all the time. You watching this video is an experience, right? But the ultimate experience we know is the experience that we have individually. like our own personal experiences. And here we come to terms with a very profound mystery, and that is the mystery of the self, the I, the me. Who am I really? So the question arises, are you just a physical being of skin, bones, and nerve activity? Or in fact, are you a conscious being of thoughts, perceptions, feelings, and sensations? Now, the self is definitely a conscious thing, and we know this from our consciousness, from our thoughts. It's a very rational thing to obviously deduce. The least we can say is that it's also part and parcel of the physical, but let's talk about it from the conscious perspective, particularly, because see, consciousness is the thing that has totally just shocked people, that every scientist and every theorist and philosopher to some degree has just put their hands up and said, you know, like we can't explain this in terms of the physical. Because if you look at if you take a brain and a pile of sand, a brain of an Einstein and a pile of sand, really there's no difference. There's no difference between the two. If you break it down to if you reduce it to its physical elements, right? It's just matter. But what makes a pile of sand and a pile of and the brain of an Einstein different is that consciousness that brain has. Now, where did this consciousness come from? As Hamza Zorsis rightly asks in his response to the God delusion, he says, how can consciousness come out of unconscious matter? I'm paraphrasing what he said there, of course, but what he's saying is, how can consciousness come out of unconscious matter? And the reality is that it can't, right? Because you can't have something conscious coming out of something that is something immaterial, coming out of something that is material, something that is conscious coming out of something that is unconscious. I mean, matter doesn't have thoughts, it doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have dreams, it doesn't have aspirations, it doesn't think, it doesn't reflect. But consciousness, it facilitates all of these things. So if it's there, then it must have come. There's no other explanation. It must have come from an ultimate consciousness. And this consciousness we refer to as Allah, right? The divine creator. And this is the best explanation. There is no other explanation. You can't argue it any other way. Okay, if so, قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْحَانَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ, as the Quran says, bring forth your truth and to bring forth your evidence if you are truthful. But if you can't bring forth your evidence, then shh. Just chill out, mate, and accept the evidence that's there. Okay, enough of the Gucci. Let's move on. Richard. You failed. Okay, so guys, yeah. Sorry. I was eating a biscuit. I don't know how it got there. It just evolved in my mouth. The eighth argument. Because evolution is true, Allah does not exist. What an idiot. Let me explain why. Let me give you the quote, right? Put out the iPad, because I'm going to read this for you. In his central argument, at the end of his chapter, why God almost certainly does not exist. He states, the most ingenious and powerful claim so far discovered is Darwinian evolution by natural selection. Darwin and his successors have shown how living creatures, with their spectacular statistical improbability and appearance of design, have evolved by slow, gradual degrees from simple beginnings. We can now safely say that the illusion of design in living creatures is just that, an illusion. And then he goes on to admit that physics doesn't have a theory for physics like evolution is for biology, but then we should have faith. And then he concludes that God almost certainly does not exist. I know, it doesn't follow, right? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so in essence, what he's saying is because evolution is true, God does not exist. Do I even have to explain? Let me just do it for the sake of it. Okay, fine, very good. Now, evolution. What Richard Dawkins is doing, he's making a category mistake, and he is confusing the agent with the mechanism, right? Just because we know how the mechanism works does not mean that the agent does not exist. For example, right? Assume the amazing analogy that John C. Lennox gives in his book, The God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God? Imagine that, you have like this tribal kind of society, indigenous kind of society, and an engine kind of just drops there, right? A Ford motor engine, like a Ford car with a Ford motor engine. Now, the people, they've never seen a car. When they hear the car moving and revving, they think, the car is God, and they think that a Mr. Ford, Henry Ford, is a God inside the car. Now, when the engine runs sweetly, Mr. Ford is happy with him, but when the engine is kind of like a bit rough, Mr. Ford is upset. Now, as time progresses and as they kind of learn more, and the guy goes to university and he studies mechanics, he comes back to the car and he examines it, and he realizes that a Mr. Henry Ford is not actually inside the car. Now, the person can come to this conclusion, but if he were to now go ahead and say, because Mr. Henry Ford is not inside the car, Mr. Henry Ford does not exist. Would he say that? Could he say that? That's so stupid. Like, that's fallacious. Like, for real, right? I like that word, fallacious. That's fallacious. That's so dumb, right? How can you say that because we have examined and understood the mechanics of something, we can say that the agent is no longer existing? That's very, very stupid. Now, there are two assertions that are made when you state that... by the way, Richard Dawkins knows that. I'm pretty sure he knows that, but it's a very clever sleight of mind that he did. So we've got to be smart when we listen to these, when we read these things. Okay, the two assertions that I make. Biological evolution is incompatible with the existence of a creator, and biological evolution accounts for the existence of life and all of its complexities. Okay, so these are the two assertions that are made. I'm going to show you how he's wrong on both accounts. Okay, so the reason why Richard Dawkins and his like hold the view that there is no intelligent design inside the biology of living organisms is due to the random mutation and the natural selection by the environment. But in actuality, right, you have to understand that it's not as random as it appears. Okay, although you can say the mutation, if evolution is true, but let's just assume evolution is true, right? Like in its entirety. We know this, yeah, let's just assume it's true in its entirety. It's not all random. You have the natural laws of physics that are governing the mutations. We have the natural laws of physics that are governing that natural selection, which is why it is inevitable. And Richard Dawkins actually holds this view that when evolution occurs in a universe like ours, it is inevitable that it ultimately reaches to some form of complex intelligent life. And then you have Simon Conway Morris, who's professor of paleontology at the Cambridge University, that states, and I quote, "Given the fundamental laws of physics, the structure of carbon and so on, even the development of carbon-based life forms, us, in other words, is inevitable in the right environment." And it just so happens that the laws of physics provide the right kind of environment. So in actuality, it's not all random. It's not all random by any means. These laws are put in such a precise way that if they were slightly off, it would be impossible for life forms like us to exist. So it's not inconceivable for us to sit back and say, hold up, this appears openly and manifestly to be the result of some intelligent designing. It doesn't refute intelligent design. In fact, it advocates it furthermore. And by the way, this is not God of the gaps. See, God of the gaps is where we say, okay, look, there's a gap. Science can't explain it, so let's put God there. We're not doing that. We're looking at the science, and the science is leading us to the divine creator, not the gap. Not the gap. Now, many people can say, look, it's chance. Just by chance, the laws happen to be just perfect of our universe. Now, for someone who advocates the chance hypothesis, they don't actually appreciate the impossibility of this happening. For example, if you wake up with a dinosaur next to you in your bed, you don't say it happened by chance. Or if you look outside your window and suddenly you see a 747 parked outside in your garden, you don't say that happened as a result of chance. This is what theorists like William Dembski referred to as specified probability. Now, specified probability is a probability that follows its own specific patterns. Let me give you an example. Imagine you have a monkey, right? And you put him in a room with a laptop and a keyboard. The next day you come in and to your surprise, the monkey has miraculously written to be or not to be, okay? Not only has he written these 6 words of an English Shakespearean play, but he's also conformed to the rules of grammar. Now, when a monkey is smashing the keyboard, you expect it to be just hitting the keyboard in one place. But specified probability means it's going to basically structure the word and move around and so on and so forth. That is something that is highly improbable. And then for it to adhere to perfectly to the rules of English grammar. Now, you would expect for it to have, for the monkey to have written up words like maybe box or dog, or in the most, strange case, apple. For the monkey to write Shakespeare, that's outrageously impossible. Now, British mathematicians have actually calculated the probability of how long it would take a monkey, taking into account all the probabilities, how long it would take a monkey to actually do this if it was based on probability, right? So the monkey did this every single moment, every day of his life, every week, every month, every year, every century, every decade, every century, every millennium. The monkey would be doing this for 28 billion years. And then the monkey would actually come up with to be or not to be. That is the probability for a monkey writing 6 words of Shakespeare. Now, the universe has only been around for half that time, approximately 14 billion years. Only half that time. Whereas it would take a monkey 28 billion years to write 6 words. You're trying to tell me that the universe, evolution is specified probability to an absolutely crazy degree. So if you're trying to say that happened by chance, it's good. The probability is much higher than 14 billion years, let alone 28 billion years. It is much higher. But the fact that it happened in such a small amount of time, in only 14 billion years, it shows us that there was some serious miraculous engineering going on behind the scenes. Like, how can you not see that? The universe evolved in 14 billion years. Life forms like us appeared in the way that we are in only 14 billion years. That's not by chance. That's not by chance. And we're talking about specified probability here. And just as a side note, we as Muslims, we don't have a problem accepting that everything evolved and everything has a common ancestry, with the exception of Adam, okay? With Homo sapiens, with human beings like us. We don't have a problem that you saying that there were hominids before, because Allah says that He has made creation, things that He has created that we have no knowledge of. So hominids, right? We don't, Homo erectus or Homo whatever, we've got no problem with you saying that they all evolved, with the exception of Adam. And it's not inconceivable. We have established that there is a divine creator, an intelligent designer. That this intelligent designer, with all of his intelligence, designed Adam with his hands in paradise and put him on this earth in a way where he fit in perfectly with the biology and everything else with the rest of the world, that he made it coherent. That's not something that is inconceivable. And the reason that we take the Quranic discourse over the evolutionary scientific discourse is because evolutionary science is inductive, is based on probability. The Quran is actually a deductive, we actually have deductive reasons for accepting it, and deductive arguments are as tight as a knot, okay? So we can actually establish deductively that the Quran is a miracle of Allah, is a miracle from Allah. Now, please do not go all crazy and start commenting below and be like, hey, the Quran is this and so on and so forth, because I've not presented my arguments for why I feel the Quran is the word of Allah. When I do that, then you're more than welcome, and I'm open to constructive criticism and feedback. But whether you see the Quran is the word of Allah or not, that is irrelevant to the discussion today. That was just a side point. The fact of the matter is that evolution is not something in any way, shape or form that presents itself as an obstacle in the belief of Allah, in the belief of a divine creator and intelligent designer. Richard, you failed. So the ninth argument, and guys, this is where we're getting to the central argument of his central argument, as he likes to call it. Richard Dawkins, he says that ultimately, right, there does appear to be design. But this is only an appearance. And although you're tempted to attribute this to the design, the temptation is a false one, because it immediately raises the question, who designed the designer? And the designer would have to be far more complex. Therefore, it would be improbable that there is a designer who designed the universe. And thus, it is only an appearance of design. Now, guys, I want you to listen in very closely. He accepts that there is an appearance of design, and the only reason why he rejects it as actual design is because he says that it raises the question, who designed the designer? That is the only reason, because he says that who designed the designer, and it's improbable, so there is no designer. Now let's discuss this, right? This is such a fallacious argument. Philosophers of science have known for the longest time that the best explanation does not require an explanation. Because the best explanation for an appearance of design would be a designer. But for you to say, no, there is no designer because you require an explanation of the designer, that means you would have to require an explanation of that designer. And then you'd lose yourself in an infinite regress of designers. But this is in total contradiction with regards to how science works, because science is all about finding an explanation. But if you say the best explanation needs an explanation, and that explanation needs an explanation, and then that explanation would require an explanation, and Richard Dawkins, your explanation would therefore require an explanation, which would require an explanation, ultimately you would have no explanation. And then there's no point for science. Richard Dawkins, your argument actually destroys science. It actually destroys science. What are you doing, man? You failed. Sorry, you failed. Okay, move on. Okay, this is the 10th argument. This is my final point, and this is the conclusion. And I'm going to show you how Richard Dawkins has proved the existence of Allah for us. Thank you, Richard. Like, for real, man. I really appreciate this. I can't explain to you, man. This book was excruciatingly painful to read because it was just so whack. But you know what? I learned so much in trying to refute you. Thank you, bro. Okay, I gotta pull this out. I'm gonna pull the iPad out again because I need to quote him. Now, no one designed the designer. We've established that there has to be a designer. His argument for why there isn't a designer is fallacious. So let's discuss his request for information about the designer. He asks who designed the designer. It's very important that we bear in mind this question is not a question that is a contention to the existence of the creator, but it is a request of information with regards to the nature of this creator. So there can only be one of two outcomes when we answer this question. Either we will establish that the creator is uncreated and undesigned, or the creator is designed and is created or is caused. Only one of the two. But you have to understand, up until now, at this point, the creator exists. Now, hear what he says. Well, before, let me give you an analogy, right, of why the creator has to be uncaused before I give you his quote. Assume that there is a school kid called Bobby who wants to go and use the toilet. And he asks the teacher, Miss, can I please go and take a pee? I need to go to the loo, right? So the teacher says that I need to ask the teacher above me. Now assume that teacher asks the teacher above her. And that teacher has to ask the teacher above him. And he has to ask the teacher above her. Now assume this went on for infinity. Bobby would never actually ever get to go to use the toilet. In reality, he would wet himself. Someone would need to give him a nappy. The only way that Bobby can go to the toilet is if there was someone that was at the top of that chain of command. For example, the head teacher that could say, you know what, go ahead. Now let's apply this to the universe. If we say who designed or who created the universe or who caused the universe, then we have to ask who designed and who caused that designer or that cause. And then who created that designer, who caused that designer, who caused that cause, who caused that cause. And this would go on for infinity, resulting in an infinite regress. But if that did, then would you ever get to that cause who caused this universe? Or would you ever get to that designer who designed this universe? No, you wouldn't. And this universe that we have around us that exists would not exist. But the fact that this universe does exist is evidence to the fact that the creator was uncaused. And we know that the creator existed because there has to be something rather than nothing. And you know what? Philosophers from Aristotle all the way up to present day William Lane Craig, and even pseudo-philosophers like your very own Richard Dawkins accept this. Let me give you his quote. Richard Dawkins accepts that there has to be a first cause of everything. Time and time again, my theologian friends return to the point that there had to be a reason why there is something rather than nothing. There must have been a first cause of everything, and we might as well give it the name God. That's what his theologian friends are saying to him. But what does Richard Dawkins say in response to his friends in his book, The God Delusion? Yes, I said, but it must have been simple, and therefore, whatever else we call it, God is not the appropriate name. The first cause that we seek must have been the simple basis for a self-bootstrapping crane which eventually raised the world as we know it in its present complex existence. Please tell me you picked up on that. He affirmed to there have to have been something rather than nothing. And he affirmed to there being a first cause. Yet he just feels we shouldn't call it the first cause because it is complex. Like that is, I've already explained how, in my ninth argument, how that can't be the case. But regardless, okay, we know there's a first cause. This cause is intelligent. This cause is conscious. It's the source of consciousness. It's the source of morality. It's the source of the design of the universe. It's the source of the universe. What else do we call it? Using conceptual analysis, we can deduce that this cause is therefore, it's intelligent. The fact that it willed for us to come into existence shows that it has a will. It has a will. It shows us that it has a personality. A personality shows us that it would want to have a relationship with its creation. And then the way that it would communicate with us is through divine revelation. And this is something that we can work out about the nature of this cause just using conceptual analysis. Just using conceptual analysis. So Richard Dawkins himself is affirming to there being a first cause that is uncaused and a cause that set off the whole thing. So in conclusion, we have shown that the argument that he made with regards to the designer needing a designer is fallacious. It is only a request for information. This is the second point. It is only a request for information about the nature of designer. It is in no way a contention to the existence of this designer. And finally, we've concluded that the designer is undesigned and uncaused. We call him Allah because the Quran tells us to call him Allah, right? We call him Allah because the Quran tells us to call him Allah. But I will discuss the Quranic discourse in a different video. But right now, see, the Islamic belief is the first pillar of Islam is the testimony. There is no God, there is no deity worthy to be worshipped in truth except Allah. Okay? I've shown you that part right now. So the next part of the testimony is, and the Prophet Muhammad is his slave and his messenger. So accepting the prophethood and accepting the message that the Prophet was sent with is the second part. And I'll discuss that in a future video. But through the help of Richard Dawkins, I have shown you, right, irrefutably, how there has to be that one deity. And this deity is worthy of worship. But we'll expand on this further in other videos. What I want to conclude with right here, I would like to conclude with an appeal. With an appeal to you guys. You've listened to me. I mean this sincerely now. You've listened to me. Now please use your mind. Employ your thinking and reasoning faculties. You've listened to me. Now please listen. And listening and reasoning is so important that Allah, He actually mentions in the Quran, قَالُوا لَوْ كُنَّا نَسْمَعُ أَوْ نَعْقِلُ مَا كُنَّا فِي أَصْحَابِ السَّعِيرِ, that the people of the hellfire said, if only we listened and used our mind and thought about it and reflected and just used our intellect, we would not be amongst the companions of the hellfire. I mean, not listening and not thinking properly and not reflecting adequately, honestly, it's such a bad thing that it causes so much catastrophe. Ultimately, the Quranic discourse is explaining the ultimate punishment that this will result in is you burning in hellfire. Now, although you may not agree, but you will agree with me that someone who doesn't listen and doesn't use their mind, doesn't use what we call in the Arabic aql, should be punished heavily. Right? Someone who murders, they've not used their mind. They've gone out and they've created chaos, they've created destruction, they've caused problems. Problems come as a result. All the world's problems are a result of first people not having listened properly, and then mainly because they never employed their thinking faculties. And this is so important. And in chapter 25 in Al-Furqan, Allah, He actually mentions again that the people who do worship their desires, they take their desires as their own deity, like you worship the desires as a god, right? For them, they are worse than the cattle. Why? Because they never listen and they never use their mind. So they're worse than the cattle. Why are they worse than the cattle? Because at least you can derive a benefit from the cattle. You can get milk and beef and meat and all these kind of things. But from someone who doesn't use their mind, from someone who doesn't think, and then they ultimately just worship their own desires. Based on their own whims and their own desires, they govern their lives. These people are of no benefit to society. So please, I mean this sincerely. I know many of you, look, you may not like me because I'm a Muslim. You may have a totally different worldview. You may not like me, you may hate me, you may hate everything that I stand for. But there is sincerity in what I'm saying right now, right? Please, you don't know what's in my heart. Don't judge me. I mean this sincerely. Just listen and use your mind. You will come to the absolutely correct conclusion. And if you use your mind and you don't come to the conclusion I come to, but you sincerely use your mind, then you know what, share it with me. But if not, then accept Islam. Or at least accept the first part of Islam. And then look into the second part. Atheism is in essence the worst kind of polytheism. It's the worst kind of polytheism. Because whereas polytheists attribute godlike attributes, heavenly, divine attributes to statues and idols, atheists, they attribute divine attributes to particles in space, to particles of like matter, and that's not really right. So I will end with this, with the verse of the Quran that will be played, that will explain, or Allah will defend His divinity Himself, right? And we'll leave that so you guys can hear that out. And I'd just like to conclude with a quote by Michael Ruse, who states, and I'm just doing this for fun, man. He states that, yes, I have written that after reading Richard Dawkins' God Delusion, I was embarrassed to call myself an atheist. And that's Michael Ruse. He's a very predominant atheist philosopher. Why? Because Richard Dawkins is a prat. And a prat is a baby banana from the Caribbean. Assalamu alaikum. Listen, right? Whether you like me or whether you like me, click the like button, share, and make sure you subscribe. And you know what? Tell everyone about this video. And we'll see you on the other side. Peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
تبارك الذي نزل الفرقان على عبده ليكون للعالمين نذيرا الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض ولم يتخذ ولدا ولم يكن له شريك في الملك وخلق كل شيء فقدره تقديرا واتخذوا من دونه آلهة لا يخلقون شيئا وهم يخلقون ولا يملكون لأنفسهم ضرا ولا نفعا ولا يملكون موتا ولا حياة ولا نشورا